Duty, duty, duty. I'm always on duty. Oh, you're going to see the Wades. I recognize the car.
Hiya, Carrie.
Hi.
Listen, there's this spiffy kid who's coming up behind me. I think he's okay. He's a very big fan of Walter Brennan's.
Walter Brennan? Okay, thanks. Walter Brennan.
Hello everybody, Jesse Dukes here and welcome to Upper Middlebrow. If you're new to the show, I talk about books and movies with my good friend Chris Bagg. It's like a book club or a movie club that you can listen to, read along, watch along. And at the moment, I am here in Malibu, and specifically just north of the Malibu Lagoon on a stretch of beach in front of the old Malibu colony, which factors into the thing that I'm introducing. Because this is a digression episode. We're talking about the movie, The Long Goodbye, the 1974 film directed by Robert Altman, starring Elliott Gould, based on Raymond Chandler's novel, which we read last fall for the show. And for this digression episode, we were lucky enough to be joined by Peter Lunenfeld. Peter Lunenfeld is a professor in UCLA's Design Media Arts Department and on the Digital Humanities and Urban Humanities faculties. He is the author of City at the Edge of Forever, Los Angeles Reimagined, and several other books, including The Secret War Between Downloading and Uploading, User, and Snap to Grid. He's also edits the MIT Press Media Work series. We were really lucky. I don't think there's anybody better to talk with LA history, and particularly bits and pieces of forgotten, semi-forgotten, barely remembered Los Angeles culture than Peter Lunenfeld. I particularly like Peter's book, The City on the Edge of Forever. It's a connectionist history of Los Angeles. It's entertaining, it's fascinating, doesn't sugarcoat the history at all, but it still manages to celebrate this weird, beautiful, dysfunctional, perpetual vacation of a city. And this movie is very much set, very obviously, in Los Angeles in the 1970s, with several scenes taking place literally right where I'm sitting right now, looking out at the Pacific, at the Malibu colony. In fact, I believe I can see the Wade residence, one of the few buildings on this stretch of beach that appear to have even survived the 1970s. This beach was not really affected by the LA fires. The Palisades fire did burn right down to the water just a little bit south of here, or a little bit to the east of here, but we're just out of the burn zone here. Anyway, let's get right into it. I went to Peter's office on the beautiful UCLA campus to record him and record the interview. I actually had some technical difficulties, so you're going to hear me mostly on the Zoom recording, so sorry about that, but you'll understand me. So we begin with a recap, and then we're going to just get right into our discussion of Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye. I hope you enjoy. So the movie, directed by Robert Altman, I don't remember the exact date. Is it 72 or 73?
73.
It's 73. It's very loosely based on the book. There are characters with the same names who in some cases resemble the original characters, in some cases don't. And it really jumps right into it. So we meet Philip Marlowe, played by Elliott Gould. He's a private detective. He lives alone with his cat in this amazing apartment. And the first 10 minutes or so is an intercut scene of Marlowe getting cat food and brownie mix at 3 a.m., intercut with the character Terry Lennox leaving Malibu with some scratches on his face and driving up to Marlowe's Hollywood Heights apartment. There are also these ever-present girls or young women in the apartment next door who are always doing yoga or something and often topless. But Terry needs a ride to Tijuana. He's in trouble. So the next day, Marlowe takes him to Tijuana overnight, then gets picked up by the cops. Terry's wife, Sylvia, is dead. So Terry Lennox is suspected for this. Marlowe spends 3 days in jail rather than tell the cops where he took Terry Lennox to. And then he gets let out because apparently Lennox has killed himself after confessing to the murder of his wife. And then from there, I don't think it's worth going into the particulars, but like the book, you have this apparent subplot with Roger Wade, played by Sterling Hayden, Sterling Hayden, the alcoholic writer, his wife, Eileen Wade. There's an interlude at a sketchy mental health treatment facility. There's some blackmail going on. There's allegations of some kind of affair with Wade's wife and Terry Lennox. There's a gangster named Augustine. Arnold Schwarzenegger shows up as a goon with a mustache and manages to take his shirt off within about 2 minutes of appearing on screen. And Marlowe is just kind of mumbling away through these twists and turns. He gets slapped around a bit, he gets hit by a car, and the whole time he's trying to figure out if Terry is really guilty of the murder or innocent, and then eventually Marlowe figures out that Terry Lennox faked his death. He confronts him in Mexico, and then this is a real departure from the book. Terry has, in fact, murdered his wife, and he's used Marlowe as an unwilling accomplice and stooge, and he's not very remorseful about it. And Marlowe shoots him dead. And then the last scene is Marlowe walking away as Eileen Wade drives up, presumably to meet up with her long-lost lover. And there's some music starts playing, and Marlowe seems happy, and he does he clips his heels and he plays the miniature harmonica, and the movie ends on, what's that song? Hooray for Hollywood, I believe is the song that plays over the credits. So,
Yeah.
So that's my recap.
I think he even jumps up and clicks his heels
really
in a very clear "Singing in the Rain" moment as well. The ending is fantastic.
So I guess I just want to launch into my first question, which, Peter, maybe you can take the lead with, which is, what role does Los Angeles play in this film?
I'm not even sure it's Los Angeles that plays the role, it's Hollywood. This is as meta a text, to use academic language, as you can find. This is a movie about movies. It's a movie about Altman kind of being there. It's also a movie about LA Light and about what happens when you're taken out of the LA Light, which is what noir does, right? It muddies it. And it's really about, I think, Altman thinking through his own, 25 years of watching movies, most of which are set in LA. And, you mentioned that at the end they sing Hooray for Hollywood, which is an ironic song about becoming famous. It's a precursor to, like, the Byrds sing So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star, right? And it's Los Angeles is a character in this, the way that Los Angeles is a character in so many other movies, but it's also kind of fascinatingly, and Norman Klein, who teaches at Cal Arts, has written a lot of really wonderful books about LA, says it's the most photographed and least remembered city in the world. And I think that, this is a gloss on that, and it's so iconic. I was thinking about the girls who live across from him and thinking about them as almost a classical Greek chorus, though they don't comment on anything. And as he leaves, the last time we see them, he goes, "What a bunch of melons," He's just So that's kind of a gloss on 70s LA. They're doing yoga when nobody knows what yoga is in the rest of the country. They're these beautiful sort of like they're what everybody dreams of, like moving next to in LA. The cops who come by are obsessed with them. There's one goofball gangster who keeps asking Marlowe about the girls, and so they're the object, right, to be looked at, right? And Marlowe, who's supposed to be the actor, right? He's supposed to be the one who drives things. He's just as passive as they are. That's what's so crazy about this movie.
Yeah. Chris, do you want to add to that, or do you want to ask your next question?
No, I mean, I watching it, I felt a lot of the same way that you do when you're watching Vertigo, and like San Francisco is just everywhere. It's like, it's so inescapable. It's so like you take Vertigo out of San Francisco and you don't have Vertigo anymore. And like, I don't know, this just like, I have a lot of, my general feeling about this film was like, what is going on? You know, like what is happening here? What is Altman up to? Peter, I like what you say about like, it's about the light, like the LA light. And because we do get, there's this moment when we're at the Wade's house and it's like a glorious sunny day. And there's really only one moment in the book where it's a beautiful, warm, sunny day. That's the moment when Eileen kills Roger Wade. Right. I mean, it's such a wacky movie. It's the first time I've seen it. It just, I mean, the LA-ness of it feels, very important. And when I heard Hooray for Hollywood playing over in my mind, I just heard, just this big like kiss off effect.
I mean, in the book, he talks about the city of 1,000 crimes, and it is LA, but in my mind, in the book, it's not as essential that it could be any big American city that's crime ridden with corrupt police and a kind of uncaring upper class that drinks themselves to death and, sleeps with each other's spouses. It could sort of be anywhere. There's even a scene in the book where Marlowe's driving back from Tijuana, and he says something like, his narration is, San Diego's kind of a pretty city, but it's nothing but sailors, and then the drive from there is about the most boring one in the world. And I would say the drive from San Diego to Los Angeles is one of the most beautiful drives.
Right, in the whole world, yes.
In the whole world.
Right.
But Marlowe seems oblivious to the beauty. I do feel like, I guess I'm curious what you both think about it. To me, even though the city is corrupt and people are doing bad things, it still feels, well, I'm curious, what do you think, Peter? To me, it still feels like a little bit of a love letter, or and it could just be my nostalgia for the 70s, but to me, it feels like a really fun LA to live in if you can avoid, the cops and the gangsters and the rich people.
I was rewatching the movie last night, and this is after the LA fires that have just destroyed much of Malibu, and I was really sad because I don't have a beachside mansion, but I sure have walked by them, and they are, an essential part of the mythos of this city. And so, the Wades have this kind of perfect Edenic life that has, the apple, right, and the serpent in it as well. And, they even talk about that. And there's just, Altman's cinematic genius is that, at one point we're watching the Wades have a big argument, but reflected in the window is Marlowe just kind of skipping around on the beach, enjoying the beach in his Undertaker's clothes, as because he's kind of dressed like it's 1948, whereas the Wades are in just perfect 70s mufti, right? The actress who plays Mrs. Wade has a backstory, as do other people. Like, the backstories of the actors are fascinating. So Jim Bouton, for example, is an ex-baseball player who's really more famous for how he fucks than how he hits the ball, right? He's an early example of somebody who's a swinger, and so he's kind of about infidelity and all these other kinds of things. And then Nina Van Pallant is this really fascinating character because she's involved with the biggest scam in the 1970s, which is the fake biography, right, of Howard Hughes. That's what her husband's doing. And there's an entire film that Orson Welles, also from this era, makes about that, right? F is for fake. And so to kind of understand how all of these things are coming together. And it's so very LA. And she couldn't be more perfect. Her hair looks like it came straight off of the ironing board, right? She's an ideal 70s blonde wearing this, these caftan creations that on anybody else would look awful. And on her, it's just like, perfection of 70s kind of Earth Mother. And then, she in the film is married to the writer who's writing popular fiction and we know this only from the book, he's embarrassed about the fact that he writes pop fiction rather than great fiction. He wants to be F. Scott Fitzgerald, but he's in fact Raymond Chandler, right? So, all of this kind of comes together it's funny that you were asking about L.A. as a character, because L.A. is a character in the first great noir, right? Double Indemnity. And, you talk about how the opening scene is Marla going to the market. Well, Jack's Market on Melrose is where one of the most famous images from Double Indemnity comes from. We have the two murderers standing next to each other in front of basically a couple of shelves worth of food at a real market called Jack's. And there's a frontality to the way that they're presented. And Jack's was a real place. And, I don't know where, I've never quite figured out what real market they shot the opening in. But yeah, it's a very LA experience to be in a 24-hour market that you pull up in your car, just kind of wander through. It's huge, right? The markets in LA are so much bigger than they are elsewhere, or they were. And that sense of like endless material abundance in the 1970s here was absolutely captured by that.
My next question was about Marlowe's depiction, but I think I can kind of jump from what you just said. I can kind of expand that. In that, why do you think Altman, because the plot is pretty far from the book, and from what you're describing and what we're talking about, that it is this intensely layered meta film about Los Angeles. Why do you think he selected The Long Goodbye as his source material? Like, what is there in the actual book that, and I know this is speculation and whatnot, but like, how do we get from there to where we get to, do you think?
I think, well, number one, it's not his choice. Remember, these movies are always part of what Tom Schatz calls the genius of the system, and sometimes it's not so genius, right? So basically, they'd own, I think it was United Artists, had owned the rights to the book for a long time, and there was a producer who had it, and that producer also had a contractual obligation to use Elliot Gould. So he's got this book, and he's got this actor, and then he goes out and he talks to a couple of other directors first, and then he talks to Altman. And Altman says, okay, I'm going to do this. And he reaches out to Lee Brackett, right, who has this androgynous name. And actually, Howard Hawks had read a science fiction. Brackett had written science fiction, and Hawks basically said, get me this guy, although it wasn't a guy. Lee Brackett's a woman, and who was a very successful science fiction writer, who then came in and actually worked on The Big Sleep. So there's this deep connection all the way through to the originary material, right? But one of the things that I was thinking about is, we're about as far from this movie as that movie was from its source materials, right? And yet, I actually looked up, I hadn't really thought about it, I looked up a couple of lists of like movies that were made in the 90s. The 90s are as far, contemporary movies that are made about the 90s, which is as far back as the 40s were in the 70s. And the number one movie they named was Tick, Tick, Boom. If you can't remember it, neither could I. It was a movie about the guy who wrote Rent, the musical that I never saw, right? Directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda, all I think either before or after Hamilton. And I mean, if that's the number one thing that people made about the 90s, I think that's because the 70s were so radically different than the 40s. Whereas, okay, we've got smartphones and,
They were sort of in the long 90s.
Right, we're in the long 90s.
In the same way some people say the 70s were the long 60s, which I don't think is entirely true, but there's something
right.
to it.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about what was it about the pull of the 40s and the 70s? Right, 9 months after this movie comes out, Chinatown comes out. Right, so you've got two of the greatest directors of the 1970s, both making movies sort of about the 40s, right, within a year of each other. Whereas there's no great directors making anything right now about the 90s because, Everclear, I don't know, I can't even name 90s bands, right? And even the music, the great soundtrack, which is two songs, right? It's Just Hooray for Hollywood, which is an old song, and then there's a new song that's created by John Williams, one of the greatest composers in the history of the cinema, who is working with a great big band leader. Why am I blanking on him? Johnny Mercer, right? So Johnny Mercer had made music in the 40s. So there's all of these people that Altman is pulling in subtly. And I think that, that's something that really, really interests me about the movie because it's all about references, right? It's, and I think that was one of the reasons people hated it.
It's also auspicious too. It's John Williams before Jaws and Star Wars. It's yes. John Williams before he was John Williams in a way.
Right.
Altman does seem to be one of those directors who has a gift for recognizing talent, before the rest of the world, as a lot of the 70s directors did. One question I have about Marlowe's character. So I'll just say one of the observations I have as an audio producer, Peter, you and I did some technical stuff as we were setting up and we were getting feedback in each other's microphones. I pay a lot of attention to that, and it's very, very obvious to me that much of Marlowe's dialogue is ADR, additional dialogue recording. I can just tell by the proximity of his voice to the microphone that it was not recorded in that food mart. You can just... And it's too quiet. If he were mumbling the way he was mumbling and you were trying to mic that with the shotgun mics they had back then, you would not be able to hear it. And sometimes you can even see that his lips don't sync with the audio. Right. And I think the syncing is so bad that I have to wonder if sometimes Altman let it be that bad. I don't know. But either way, the effect for me is to sort of wall off Elliot Gould's Marlowe from the rest of the world. And it's as though he's passing through this world, but not really of it. And I guess maybe the question for you, Peter, is does he feel, the mumbling and the kind of pothead daze that he seems to be in all the time, to me feels very 70s. But then Altman describes him as a character lifted out of the 40s and plunked. And I'm curious, which of those do you see? Do you see is he a 40s character, or is he a 70s character, or is he something else?
Well, what detective in the history of detective fiction or detective film spends the entire thing saying, it's okay with me, right? I mean, it's okay with me. That is not what we expect, right? This is, I don't think Altman would talk about trying to play with the gender stereotype of the male detective. But, this private dick isn't using it. Right? I mean, he doesn't have an affair with anybody. He's got these incredibly beautiful women next door, and all he does is buy him brownie mix, right? And that's all part. He is out of time, but he's also out of society, right? And that's what makes the final scene so shocking. Because we finally get to the thing that he cannot live with, right? The one thing he's not okay with is that his trust has been betrayed, right? And that seems to be even more important than Sylvia Lennox's death, right? And that brings us all the way back to the sort of bullshit code of the white knight that Chandler builds up, right? The detective who doesn't take divorce cases. And we even hear him repeat that. And, 9 months later, we've got Jake Gittes, who only does divorce cases, right? Because that's what detectives really do. They do divorce cases because, murder crimes.
The rent on that apartment without taking some divorce cases.
No, exactly. And so, I think that that's one of the things that I really like about this film. And I think you're absolutely right. I'd never thought about the ADR, and I never really thought about the sync issues. But, Altman loves to play with sound. Altman loves to play with dialogue. And, this is an early example of that in his that's really, by the time we hit Nashville and Three Women, like everybody's mumbling, right? And mumbling over each other.
And you can kind of hear them all because of the ADR, right? You're getting like the mumble mix.
Yeah. Right, yeah, you're getting the mumble mix. But I also just kind of feel like, he's referred to by the director when he's talking to Brackett. He calls him Rip Van Marlowe. And, the car is an example of that. Like, he's the only, no one makes a mention of the fact that he's driving this magnificent 40s coupe, right? Whereas Roger Wade has a hot little, 70s Mercedes. And even when he gets down to Mexico, the corrupt Mexican officials have this, big boat of a Cadillac, right? But a 70s Cadillac, or at least late 60s Cadillac. But, he's driving around for some reason in this 40s car, always wearing a suit. He's the only one who wears a tie in the whole thing. The tie keeps getting mentioned, right? And my favorite, no, there's no such thing as my favorite detail from The Long Goodbye because there's so many. But one of my favorite details is when Roger Wade kills himself and Mrs. Wade and Marlowe are going into the surf. The only thing he takes off, he doesn't take off his jacket or his shoes. He takes off his tie, hands it to her, and says, "Hold on to my tie." Right? I mean, no one in the history of saving someone from drowning has ever started with their tie. Right? It's just, but it's just, the tie is like Chekhov's, gun above the mantelpiece. It's just, somehow it has to be used.
It made me think of Jesse and I have a big Tom Ripley obsession, and one of the Ripley movies that John Malkovich plays Ripley. There's this moment when he's like leaving a train compartment, and he takes his watch off and hands it to his sort of co-conspirator and says something like, "Oh, take my watch. If it gets broken, I'll kill everyone on the train." And it's this like the tie. It's this like weird expansion of importance for something where you're like, why is attention being drawn to that at this particular moment?
Well, speaking of attention, what's going on with the cat food?
I believe that the entire film revolves around Courry Brand cat food. I believe that the film, it happens 3 times. The first time is when Marlowe tries to convince the cat that he has bought Courry Brand cat food. He takes another kind of cat food out, and using a cheese slicer, if you notice, he uses a cheese slicer to pack it back into the original, the old empty Courry Brand cat food, and then gives it to the cat. And the cat looks at it, wanders around it, and then hops down away from it. And in my opinion, we are being handed a gangster movie from the 40s, right? Which is Courry Brand cat food, but it has something else in it. And he's kind of put it in, and he's lying to the cat the way that he's lying to the producers, the marketers, and to us. Oh, yeah, this is just if you like the Big Sleep, you'll like The Long Goodbye. And we're doing Chandler, but we're not. Right. And then in case we didn't get that, he tells the cops the same story. And so it's like, okay, here, I'm going to tell you about this time that I lied to my cat. And the cops are looking at him like he's totally insane. Why is this guy not asking about why we're here? Why is he telling us about the cat? And I honestly felt, again, I watched, this must have been maybe the 5th time I watched the movie, maybe more, last night. But it really just hit me, right? Because, it hit me for a lot of reasons. Because on Tuesday, I was teaching my media histories class at UCLA about double indemnity and the long footprint of noir. Taking it all the way from, doomed Walter Neff, seeing a naked ankle with an anklet on it coming down the staircase. He's just, he's not fucked from birth, but he's fucked from that moment, right? And, he's going to die, she's going to die, and there's going to be aluminum particles blown into the air and, turned into shadows for the next forever, right? And so I lead them through and I, talk about Bogart, and then I talk about, Blade Runner, and then I talk about the next Blade Runner, and I actually finish up with Detective Pikachu, right? Which was, I was actually interviewed by a news source about that. It was not my finest hour, but who doesn't like publicity? So the first impersonation we get from the guard at the Malibu colony is, Barbara Stanwyck talking to Walter Neff, right? She's Walter.
I just don't understand it.
I just don't understand it. Right, exactly. And that character, right, is the world's worst guard. He's always letting people through. But he's another perfect example of how we're going to be brought into a world where Walter Brennan still means something, right? Where, and again, it's like there's a young guy who is following Marlowe, and he's a young, dumb crook. And Marlowe tells the guard, oh, he's a big Walter Brennan fan. And the guy does a good Walter Brennan impersonation. And the kid looks at him just kind of like everybody else watching the movie going what have you done? Who the hell is Walter Brennan? Right? It's marvelous.
I mean, if he's not laying it on thin, all these references to noir of the past. I read some article that described it as both a neo-noir and a satirical neo-noir. Is it satire? I mean, and if it's satire, I don't think the satirical target is Raymond Chandler and those great films you're talking about. So if it's satire has a target, right? So if it's satire, what's the target?
I think it's a riff. It's not a satire, right? There's so much jazz in this film for 1973 that you can think of it as it's playing a leitmotif differently. It's picking up something and running with it, because basically they said that by 1973, the idea of the white knight who comes in and solves crimes doesn't make sense anymore. Right? Nobody's going to believe it. And the first poster for the movie was a lot it looked like a classic gangster, mystery movie. And when they re-released the film, they actually got an artist from Mad Magazine to do it because they were going to play up that aspect. So, but I don't think that's quite right either. I feel like, I don't like to use or throw the term postmodernism around, but it's very much a pastiche as opposed to a satire, right? There's a great love for the source material, right? There's a love for the kind of language, but the language also doesn't work. Like my 18-year-old students are just delighted by the language in Double Indemnity. Like, it's so snappy. It's so completely, I mean, these are students, who just, marinating in hardcore porn. And, here they are watching two people who the nakedest they get is a towel that was argued over with the Breen office about length, right? But on the other hand, they're fully cognizant that everything that these people are saying to each other is so much sexier than anything they're watching on Pornhub, right? That there's so much desire there, and there's so much bad there. I mean, everything they're doing is wrong, right? And everything they're doing is just from lust and from all the worst human emotions. And yet it's all sort of covered. And I think that there's a deep, deep respect for that, and a kind of question, like, okay, the second big scene, right, are these naked girls next to Marlowe, but it doesn't even interest him, right? He's already a nerd to the 70s and to all of that, and he's still trying to find a code, and that code is that a friend is a friend, right? And that you'll betray your country before you betray your friends, right? And everything's okay with him even when he's in the clink, right, for 3 days. He doesn't know when he's going to get out, right? But he will not rat, right? He will not give up something that oddly it's never established why he likes Terry so much. Terry seems like an asshole from minute one, right? He's kind of driving. He's just beat up his wife, and we know he's beat up his wife, right? We don't know she's dead, but we know that they've gotten into a fight. And this isn't the first time, but it doesn't really matter.
It is, the book does a better job making Terry Lennox a more complicated character, and also he hasn't murdered his wife in his book. Right. He is complicit of some things. He's perpetuated this scam, and he's also, Marlowe is disillusioned because he seems to kind of adopted this new identity and seems to care more about, having achieved a certain material success. I mean, that's why he keeps marrying marrying Sylvie and divorcing her and marrying her again, as he kind of needs her money. He needs the family money. So he's disillusioned, but not to the same degree. And he doesn't kill her, he doesn't kill him in the book. He merely sort of breaks up as a friend, So it does feel like in this way, Altman, even if he's riffing, he's also escalating the stakes. He's saying this isn't a movie about a white knight who cares about truth, because the book's Marlowe, as cynical as he is, his cynicism stems from idealism. His cynicism stems from constantly being disappointed by the corruption he sees around him. And in this case, this Marlowe doesn't seem all that thrown off by the corruption he sees around him. The thing that really makes him pull out his gun, as you say, is, I thought a friend was supposed to be a friend, and you weren't. And, you treated me, you played me for a sucker, basically.
Yep.
Peter, you just brought up the sort of the amazing language of Double Indemnity, and like the question I had for, the thing that really strikes me about the book, The Long Goodbye, is just the lyricism of Chandler's writing. Like, there are these moments when you're like, oh my gosh, this is as good as anything that Fitzgerald ever wrote. It's incredible. And I'm wondering, do you see that lyricism appearing in the film? And if so, in what form? Like, how is Altman doing that same sort of lyricism, if he is?
I actually think that the lyricism comes from the camera rather than the actors' mouths. It's the way that things are done. I mean, we get classic tough guy stuff from the gangster. What's his name again?
Augustine is the character.
Right. Yeah, Augustine. Yeah. And we kind of get snappy 40s patter from him. But we don't get any snappy patter from our our titular hero, right? He's, you know, it's okay by me is kind of like his attitude about everything, you know. And if you have that, you're not going to have that kind of lyrical interaction. We also have this sort of line in Winter, right, with our writer character, and he's done. He's exhausted. He can't do it anymore, right? So I think that, you know, this movie comes out, you know, and it's not like it was being made thinking, oh, Watergate and the end of the Vietnam War with the U.S. losing and fleeing Saigon and a worldwide economic shock because of oil prices, right? He's not, Altman, like, directors don't make movies like that, but directors who tap into zeitgeist, and definitely that's Robert Altman, he's feeling something in the air, and what's in the air in 1973 is complete and utter exhaustion. It's the end of the 60s. It's the start of the kind of stagflationary Carter, Ford, whip inflation now kind of thing, which, you know, is still going to have great music in California, but it's going to be, you know, a little bit older. It's going to be a little bit more jaded. And also the kind of connection between people that you saw in the 60s, it's already dead in LA by this time because of Manson. So if there's one, you know, the kind of crimes that Chandler's characters face in the 30s, 40s, and 50s when he's writing, they're totally eclipsed by the utter madness, right? And the randomness, right, of this assassination plot of just regular people to start a race war so that this pimp can, you know, enact ideas from, you know, Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein when he takes over and rules white people. Like that, this is so completely crazy that I think, you know, and Altman is in the middle of all of this. So and I think, you know, a movie we could think about in relationship to this would be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, right? In a kind of weird way, because it's it's trying to change cinema history by having, right, by making it possible to have that kind of belief because you stop Manson from killing Sharon Tate.
And Jim Bouton or Terry Lennox is the Leo character who actually turns out to be an okay guy, right? Who actually stands by his friend, even though maybe he's going to abandon him. Because, yeah, I would say, I can't remember his name, but Brad Pitt's character would be the Marlowe stand-in, right? The innocent,
completely, yeah,
innocent, loyal friend, kind of secretly a badass. But yeah, just as dark as that film is actually much more optimistic than The Long Goodbye. I mean, Marlowe seems like he's in a good mood at the end of it, but one wonders how long that will last. You know, he stood up for once. I don't know. I don't quite know what to make of that ending. It feels deeply ironic. Whereas the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood does not feel ironic. It feels like the good guys won.
It's cathartic, right? There's no catharsis in this movie. So in that, it's kind of anti-Aristotelian, right? We leave, and that's one more reason that I think contemporary audiences just didn't like it. Contemporary critics and contemporary audiences did not like this movie.
It makes me think of what you said about the girls as the Greek chorus. In none of the Greek plays does the chorus end as a group of catatonics. Right. Like that doesn't ever happen. Right. You know, like the chorus usually gets the last word because that's what we need.
Right.
You know, we need to hear what we just saw, and you know, to really drive home the point of the catharsis. The girls are just like, maybe they're stoned, who knows, but they're not responsive, and that feels sort of like that's like Altman's zeitgeist at that moment. That's the last time we're in LA, and then we go and we get this odd ending in Mexico.
Well, one of the most famous books about screenwriting is called Save the Cat, right? The center idea is that midway through the third act, the hero needs to save the cat from something. And again, here's a film that does not deliver. The cat disappears when he goes off to prison and is never seen again, right? Maybe we hope the cat has found someone with their own supply of Courry Brand cat food, but I just think the cat's gone and is now a feral cat, not very happy, and the girls didn't even take him in, right? You'd sort of think that the girls would.
You didn't even know you had a cat.
Didn't even know you had a cat because we're so stoned, right? And so.
Have you read Joe Haldeman's The Forever War?
No.
Oh, it's wonderful Hemingway-esque sci-fi novel from about this time. I want to say 72, 73.
74. It's 74, yeah. It's like...
Yeah, and what's interesting because Chris and I read it about a year ago, and our title for that episode was Don't Save the Cat. Because similarly, there's a cat, and it's a fascinating sci-fi scenario that's using kind of like, you have one soldier who, through the combat's happening so far away relativistically that every time the soldier is deployed, he comes back and 70 years has gone by. And he's living in a different world, which, Haldeman deployed to Vietnam and came back, probably deployed in the mid-60s and came back in the 70s and found a very different world with no grown-ups. And a world in which cats were not getting saved, Yeah, I don't have a question about it, but I agree with that theme, and I'm curious, is there a tone, or is there if Altman's saying something to us about, there are no adults and the kids are not all right, what are we supposed to do? Is there a message like that at the end of the film? Is there some, shoot your best friend and play the harmonica and click your heels? What's the lesson?
Erich von Stroheim was once asked about what was the message of this movie, and he just spat out in his Austro-Hungarian accent, messages are for envelopes. So, and I kind of think that about this movie. Like, one of the things, it's an indeterminate work of art. It's very open-ended. And the more you know about the history of Hollywood and the history of crime fiction and the history of noir, the more you can read into it, but none of that's necessary, right? I mean, it's all, if you just are interested in this kind of beautiful vision of LA, you can get that. If you're interested in just, Elliot Gould as a kind of very strange Judaic sex symbol, right? You can get that. It's only what I forget when MASH comes out, but it's like 2 years later, right? No. Wait, I think MASH comes out after this, because I think so. I thought it was more mid-70s.
Certainly the TV show started in the mid-70s.
Yeah, but the right.
1970 is MASH the film.
So he's already worked. So he's had a massive hit with this actor, right? So maybe he thinks that magic will hit again, even when he's delivered something in MASH that is also totally zeitgeisty, right? Using this kind of heroicism, right? But at least they come in, right? Elliot Gould comes in with Donald Sutherland, right? And there's that one sequence where they're asked who they are, and they just look straight at this nurse and go, "We're the pros from Dover," right? And so they're taking ownership in a way that never happens, right? You can't believe that Marlowe even accepts any money for what he does, because he doesn't even do much, right? He he also solves the one mystery that he's actually charged with in one day, right? He just goes and he finds Roger Wade and he says, you can leave now, right? And then he does. So basically he's made $50 plus whatever expense, however much he paid for gas that day. He's not exactly padding his expenses. And, you know, he's not supposed to be real, right? He's very much a kind of avatar of our imagination. And I think Altman, if there's a message, it's that as the context changes, so too does the archetype have to change, right? That the archetype is it's not a Jungian vision where the archetype stays the same forever. And we have to kind of wait for a resurgence of the quote unquote, you know, making America great again with Reagan, that you start to get the kind of hard-boiled 80s and 90s neo-noirs.
Yeah,
which are actually great. I think Lethal Weapon is great. I think, and there is something to, you know what, our cops are flawed, but they're gonna figure out who killed that girl. You know, and it doesn't matter if he has diplomatic immunity. They're bringing him in, and you can tell why those films are appealing, and also I think some of those movies feel like masterpieces of structure now. Like when you watch Die Hard now, it's just like, this is an extremely well crafted film. Yep. But I'm also thinking about what this is kind of reminding me when you say pastiche is Burn After Reading. The Coen brothers pastiche of something like 3 Days of the Condor, or All the President's Men. These 1970s paranoid thriller movies, and it's kind of doing the same thing Altman does, because it's the pastiche. It's all of the same things. The meetings at the Washington Mall and handing things under the newsletter, and you meet somebody in the parking garage and the tires squeal and somebody's building something in the basement, except for the stakes are nothing, right? The stakes are like somebody's having an affair and somebody lost a few emails or something like that add up to nothing. And it feels similar to that, although it also, that film feels, the Coens have this kind of manic, snappy dialogue, screwball comedy pacing, and this is more like jazz. This is Marlowe. It's almost like Marlowe's not acting, he's doing improv. Okay, you pretend to be the cops who are beating me up, and I'll rub ink on my face and start singing Sewanee. A lot of that was improv, by the way. Feels so like. Yeah, it was very much that, especially the stuff with Roger Wade. A lot of that was just these two actors kind of riffing off of each other, and Sterling Hayden was drunk for a lot of it. So, which, of course, is sort of perfect. And of course, that's another connection back to that early era, right? That he is a noir star, right? Who's then brought, as a young man, who's then brought back, and his physicality, he's 6'5", he's 210 pounds. Baritone, natural baritone.
Yeah, natural baritone. Really, just like he's a joy to watch in that film. And yeah, so again, there's that kind of connection to the original moment. And when you think about this film, and you brought up the Coens, like they do a noir. They do a straight adaptation of The Glass Key that they call Miller's Crossing, right? And I like it because I like the Coen brothers and I love Dashiell Hammett. So, but is it in their top 10? Absolutely not. They need it. And does Miller's Crossing come close to being as compelling a film as The Long Goodbye? Absolutely not, right? In part because they're playing the material straight. They also said it was a period piece, so they set it in the 20s, right? But, other Hammett things have been updated. I can't remember the name of it. There was a Bruce Willis version of the Continental Op that
Last Man Standing.
Blood, from Blood. I can't remember the name. It was one of his first novels. Not a great film, but at least an attempt to update it.
I do really like Blood Simple, which isn't quite a noir, and clearly, I mean, they get the term Blood Simple from Hammett, from Red Harvest.
Yeah. Red Harvest is the book that that they then remade as the one you just mentioned, Last Man Standing.
Last Man Standing, right? Yeah, with Christopher Walken, right? And I don't think that was very good either. And I'm sort of out of questions. I mean, Chris, do you have any others, or Peter, was there anything else you hoped we would talk about?
Well, I wanted to hear your take on why the gangster, why we all get naked in the end, why everybody takes their clothes off. Is it so Schwarzenegger can flick his pecs at the camera, which he does 4 or 5 times, but it's just, I mean, maybe it's part of everything we've been talking about so far, where we're taking this thing and then complicating it and making it strange. But what do you think is going on in that moment?
This is This is a film that, for the most part, is totally fuzzy around the edges. It feels like, as you mentioned, everybody's smoking grass or really eating hash brownies, right? And it just kind of feels like everybody's moving through a kind of purple haze, right? To keep mixing our drug metaphors. Except for 3 moments, right? Actually 4. One of them's fake, right? And the first is the murder of Sylvia, right? Which happens off screen, but we see the evidence of it, right? In the scratch marks. The second is the utterly shocking moment when what is his name? I keep forgetting the name of the gangster.
Augustine.
Augustine, right? Augustine. When Augustine talks about how he really cares deeply for this mistress. He says, "I sleep with a lot of women, but you I make love to. Besides my family, you're the person I care the most about." And then out of nowhere, he delivers the most violent action in the film, which is he smashes a Coke bottle across her nose, right? And then this bizarre let's all get naked thing, which also creates a kind of male version of the chorus that we've been talking about, right? Of the Greek chorus, right? Now, which also makes reference, because it's got a Jew, a Mexican, and an Irishman. That's a reference to 40s war movies, right? World War II platoons, and that's the joke there. But then, Marty Augustine, thank you. Marty Augustine says, I undress completely to, bare my soul, to apologize. And now we're all going to do that. And it's got a very Esalen feel to it. It's like Marty Augustine is some sort of weird cult leader, and this is, it's like one of those trust exercises that they used to pull, and that they still do in corporate retreats. It had that sort of like, we're all going to do this together, but only because I say so. And yeah, it's another one of those kinds of sequences that you just wonder, like, what are they doing? And then, one of them runs back for his wallet, and it's a bit of slapstick. It's also something that I think what's interesting about it is that it never could have flown in the 40s. You never could have had a scene like that, right? It's just too, it's not homoerotic, but it's just too weird. And, again, it's like one of my favorite scenes in there. And Schwarzenegger, who's uncredited, is just like, what is this monster doing? And that was really when he looked even weirder than he did in the 80s, right? He was still competing. And so he's just this weird lumpy mass of Austrian oak.
It just occurred to me with those massive pecs, and with Marlowe there in his 1940s suit, is Marcel Duchamp and Yves Babbitt's at the museum, right? And Chris, I don't know if you know this story. I actually read about it first in Peter's book. But there was a kind of a stunt photograph taken for some art exhibition, I think in Pasadena. Do I have that right?
Pasadena, yeah. It was the first American retrospective of Duchamp's work.
Right, and so Duchamp's there playing chess, dressed up in a kind of 1950s or 40s suit, and then Eve Babbitt's is this, 20-year-old ingenue who, I'm trying to think of the polite way to say this, large breasts, who is completely naked playing chess with him. Both of them aware of the visual impact of this, and it's photographed by a fairly famous photographer, and I don't know where it ran.
That's amazing. That's just, it's about as Duchamp as it gets.
Yeah.
That's just lovely.
No, it's a classic, and I've never thought of Eve Babbitt and Arnold Schwarzenegger as being the same pictorially, but I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, she's a better writer. I think that, again, somehow Altman's just, how does he find Schwarzenegger, who's going to be the governor of the state of California? Again, that poetry was visual, right? And the fact is that, Schwarzenegger doesn't get a line, but he's totally memorable and it's precisely because everybody's getting naked. And maybe it was that simple. Maybe it was we've got this monster here. How am I ever going to get him to take his shirt off? Because, that's a reveal, right? It's like magic, right? He looks big with his shirt on, but he looks like Arnold with his shirt off. And I also think that, this is a totally aphysical Marlowe, right? We expect our gumshoes to be able to duke it out, and he doesn't, right? He's beat up a couple of times, which happens to Marlowe in the novels, but Marlowe always gets, he gets his licks in, but not this Marlowe, right? This Marlowe is passive all the way through until the very end. And we started with talking about the points of violence, right? The next point of violence after that is when, and I'm not counting when Marlowe gets beat up or anything like that, but the next point of violence that we see is not even when Roger Wade goes into the water, because we don't see him drowned. We know he does. But the next one is actually the photographic evidence of Terry Lennox's death. And actually, I did not realize this until the last viewing I saw, but there's full frontal nudity in that photograph, which is also not something, you are not going to see a penis in 1940s movies. And so it's very short, but it's really even to this day, that's kind of taboo within Hollywood cinema. It's lots of naked women, no naked men, right? And so there's that, but that's faked, right? And then the fourth moment of violence is visceral, but it's not even as visceral as the Coke bottle. We see him, and then it's almost diminished, actually. The only violence that feels real, right, is when the girl's face gets smashed. The rest of it feels like movie violence, even to the extent of that, little jig that Marlowe does at the end, clicking his heels and playing his tiny harmonica, which also, again, instead of dialogue, there's the harmonica. It's just, and in that, he's playing with all of these signifiers beyond dialogue that I think, make this a 70s movie and not a 40s movie.
I would love to ask you both the trivia question I have prepared.
Sure.
I've
also got trivia.
Oh,
okay, great.
I did bring trivia. You guys scooped me during the John Williams part,
okay.
So I came up with another one.
Okay.
We'll see how I did on the fly.
All right.
Yeah, the way we usually do this, where there's three of us, is that we put our answers in the Zoom chat.
Perfect.
So, and what you'll do is you'll send me the message.
I see.
So you'll click on the little thing,
right.
And you'll just say send it to Chris.
Okay.
Since you guys are both very smart and know everything, maybe you're just going to get this right off the bat. But
I doubt that.
So Elliot Gould actually owned something of Raymond Chandler's that appears in this film. Was it A, the tie that Marlowe takes off right before he swims out to attempt to save Roger Wade, but as you just pointed out, Peter, because he is aphysical, he can't get past the breakers. B, Raymond Chandler's 1948 Lincoln Continental. Or C, a 1953 Olivetti studio typewriter that Chandler owned and wrote on. So the tie, Chandler's car, the 1948 Continental, or Chandler's typewriter are your options.
Okay, I send this to you, right?
Yes, you send it. Yep, you send it just to me.
There's no prize, but there is suspense.
Exactly, yes. Okay, I have both of your answers. Jesse has selected Chandler's 1948 Lincoln Continental. Peter has selected the 1953 Olivetti Studio 44 portable typewriter. It's the car. Elliot Gould owns Raymond Chandler's 1948 Lincoln Continental, which I believe
the car
is
we
the
see in the
car.
film.
Right,
The only reason I got that is Peter mentioned that he was driving that car.
The car is such a wild incongruity. It
just makes, oh my God, that's too good to be true. So I love it. I was thinking the typewriter I could imagine was still hanging around somewhere, but I couldn't believe that his car was still around in the 70s. So I'm blown away. That is just, I will file that one away and never get it wrong.
And that what makes it even more amazing is what you brought up earlier, that the casting of Elliot Gould was even sort of a pre-thing. It wasn't like they had a contract.
He owned it before the film.
Yeah.
He just okay. No, that I'm
Raymond Chandler's car.
I'm stunned. That's just great.
When I read it, I was like, "What? Really?" All right, Jesse. What do you got?
I just also want to mention too, Peter. You mentioned this before, but I just one of the things, we are taping this about a month after the LA fires, and we're still waiting for the Pacific Coast Highway to open up. You know, they're still doing relief work. Little bits will open here and there. I believe that Sunset Point is now open, but one of my Google personal pins is the Wade House in the Malibu colony, just a little bit north of Surfrider Beach, which Peter, you've written about quite a bit too. It's just on the other side of the lagoon, as I understand it. There, like behind that Ralph's, essentially.
Yes.
And I have no idea if that area is. I believe that area is okay.
I think it is. I don't know, but we would have heard about it.
I think you can't get there, but plenty of similar houses have burned. I've seen photos of a number, and it's weird mixture of complicated feelings, because there's a part of me that feels like, well, maybe this is not a great place for a house because these things keep happening. But then feel terrible for people who lost their home, and also they're magical houses. When you're out there on the beach looking up at these houses and imagining being inside and cooking a meal, it's a wonderful Los Angeles fantasy that you get to indulge in even on those walks.
And the party that the Wades have has this kind of magic, like, oh, we just wandered down the beach and came in, and now we're going to drink akavit with other screenwriters, and the Malibu colony was literally built for those people, by those people, going all the way back to the 30s.
Yeah, and that house probably belongs to Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks, or if not, he's next door, right? They're next door.
My trivia, I'll give one. Who owned that house?
Do you want to give us multiple choice?
Can you give us multiple choices?
Sure. Multiple choice is the producer, Johnny Mercer, the composer, or Robert Altman, the director.
Oh, wow.
I'll go with B, Johnny Mercer. I didn't chat it at you, but...
Okay.
I'm going to go with A. I'm going to go with the producer.
It's Saltman's house.
No way. No way.
Saltman's house.
I guess that's what MASH gets you, right?
Yeah, that's what MASH gets you. Yeah. I mean, real estate was cheaper, and you could be a genius and buy that as opposed to just being a genius hedge fund manager, right? So okay. Yeah, that's my piece.
Yeah, now if you make a successful film, you get a 3-bedroom in Westwood.
Right. In West Hills. In West Hills.
So my trivia is about Jim Bouton, who is the actor who portrays Terry Lennox, and he is also probably most famous for writing a kind of tell-all baseball personal narrative that came out around this time called Ball 4, which I would also say was probably kind of the source material for movies like Major League and Bull Durham. You know, it tells it like it is. But he was famous for a number of things. So which of these things is not true about Jim Bouton? I'm going to give you 4, and one of them is not true. A, he once got in a fist fight with Mickey Mantle for whistling at Mantle's wife. B, he won his 2 starts that he started in the World Series for the Yankees in the 1960s. I don't remember the year. C, he was a delegate to the 1972 Democratic Convention for McGovern. And D, he was one of the inventors of Big League Chew, the bubble gum.
Okay. All right, I've just sent mine. These are great questions.
Okay, I'm not going to tell you what you both guessed, but I'll just let you react in real time. So the correct answer is A. He did not get in a fist fight with Mickey Mantle for whistling at Mantle's wife. He did have some beef with Mantle, although they made up.
Right. Okay.
But he did do all of those things, and in fact, he was penniless at one point, and then Big League Chew saved his life. He's one of those people who has made and lost several fortunes in the course of his life, and Big League Chew allowed him to retire comfortably.
That's wonderful.
God, the Mantle one just had great job, because the Mantle one had the ring of truth.
It totally had the ring of truth.
Jim Bouton's kind of playing himself a little bit, right?
Totally, yeah.
It's not something that actually happened, but it certainly could have happened.
Right. And did he ever do any other film work? I can't think of anything.
I think 1 or 2, yes. And then after this is one of the most amazing things that I didn't include. He then went back into baseball and was the ace pitcher for Kurt Russell's dad's quixotic semi-pro baseball team, or fully professional but minor league baseball team, the Portland Mavericks. And there's a great documentary out about that. And they were a team that formed in Portland, and they became very successful, but they refused to cooperate with Major League Baseball. So even though they were playing the minor league clubs associated with other major league teams, they were not part of that system. They didn't feed a major league team. And they were kind of a sort of early version of Moneyball. They were a lot of people who were drafted 7th and weren't bonus babies, who had a chip on their shoulder. And they were very successful for a few years. I believe Kurt Russell played for them for a while, too. He was quite athletic in his early days. And there's a great documentary about it. I think it's on Netflix.
Yeah, the something bastards of baseball, right?
Battered bastards of baseball.
The battered bastards of. It's Yeah, it's good that he's not a great actor. He's not very good.
But he's right for that role, I think, because
he plays an asshole pretty well.
You don't really mind when he gets it in the end. And that moment when they're playing liar's poker, you kind of know everything you need to know about their relationship at that moment, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the liar's poker is also, that's the movie in miniature as well. There's so many times that the movie just says, we're playing liar's poker and this guy's going to lose, right? Right? The hero wins liar's poker. That's that. We want to be him, but we don't want to be him in this situation.
Right. It's like he keeps losing at liar's poker, and then finally he just punches the guy in the nose. Except for,
absolutely, I'd be delighted.
So actually coming up next is the film Ripley Underground by Roger Spottiswoode. It is a joint British, German, and American production starring Barry Pepper. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Awesome. Well, Peter, thank you so much for being here and for joining us. This was awesome. And Upper Middle Brow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes can track down that elusive brand of cat food. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by me, Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Reich. Thank you guys so much. And Peter, once again, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. This was a blast.
Thank you so much. This was so great. So thank you.
And as a reminder, Chris and I are both writers and editors and can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com, or you can roll as a patron at the You Really, Really Like Us tier, which includes some one-on-one editorial time with one of us or the other or both. And you can look Peter up and buy his book at his website, which I love this detail, includes, I want to say, 500-word, 100-word, 50-word, and 10-word bios, all as in-page links to one another, which is incredibly useful if you're trying to very quickly copy a bio for a podcast credit. But check it out. I highly recommend City at the Edge of Forever. It's and particularly now, if you're sort of dealing with a sense of loss about Los Angeles, it's a fun book to read while you're absorbing and working through some of those feelings and thinking about, what we've lost and what we hope to recover.
I love this. So this was great.
Good, thanks. This was so what a great way to spend a snowy Thursday evening.
What
yes,
evening?
It is snowy. It's sorry. I'm in Oregon. I'm in Bend, Oregon.
I lived in Buffalo for a long time. I don't do that anymore.
Oh wow!
I don't do any of that anymore.
Thanks, everybody. Jesse here again. Looking out on the beach in Malibu, the same beach where Sterling Hayden, as Roger Wade, waded into his death. In fact, that might be the Wade residence right there. I'm going to have to look it up when I get home. There are a couple of different houses that might be the one. What a beautiful beach. You can understand why people want to live in Malibu, even though it is constantly subject to disaster. But right now it's awfully peaceful and beautiful, so let's go out with some of the wave sounds. Hopefully you find some time on a peaceful beach sometime soon.